In this video, I'm going to introduce adjectives. And the first thing you'll notice when looking at adjectives is that there are three forms of the word listed when you look at a vocab list or in the dictionary. And if you look at the end of the word, you can probably figure out what these different forms are. If we have magnus, magna, magnum, this is going to be our masculine form, this is going to be our feminine form, and this is going to be our neuter form. Okay? You might also see something like this, pulcher, pulcra, pulcrum, where you see that same a and but this is a little weird because it's missing the us. This is like the words for man, wir, or boy, puer, or teacher, magister, how you just have some masculine words that end in r. So you might see that, but you'll still see the a and the still indicating masculine, feminine, and neuter. These adjectives that we're going to look at for now are specifically called 2-1-2 adjectives. 2-1-2 adjectives, because they only use first and second declension endings. The magnus masculine comes from second declension, magna feminine comes from first, and magnum neuter comes from second. Thus you have 2-1-2, second declension, first declension, second declension. And these adjectives can only use first and second declension endings. You can't stick third declension endings on these words, and that'll come up in just a minute. So one other thing to point out about adjectives is, as you can see, since there is a masculine, feminine, and neuter form, an adjective has no set gender the way nouns do. When you look at a dictionary entry for a noun, it tells you the gender of that noun, and that doesn't change. Adjectives don't have a set gender because they change their gender to match the noun that they're modifying. So let's take a look at that. Okay. So if we have the adjective magnus, magna, magnum. Okay, again we see this. Again we see the us, a, and we say, okay, this is our masculine form, this is our feminine form, and this is our neuter form. Okay? So you're going to use those different forms to match the gender of the word that you're describing. So if we were going to say the big house, the word house, that A tells us pretty quickly, okay, this is a first declension feminine word, and so I need the feminine adjective to describe it. So if I want to say the big house, I would say villa magna, so that they are both feminine. Okay, it's incorrect to say villa magnus. If I see the word bellum, that tells me, oh, that's a second declension neuter word. Thinking of our second declension endings, that's a neuter word. So that means I need the neuter form magnum. And now we have bellum, magnum. They're both neuter. Amicus, this us tells us pretty quickly that it's a second declension masculine word. And so we're going to take the masculine form and say amicus magnus. Again, it's incorrect to say amicus magna or amicus magnum. It has to match the same gender. So here we have feminine, feminine, neuter, neuter, masculine, masculine. And so far, you'll see that the endings just match. Okay? But that's not always going to be the case. The reason they matched for these words is that villa is a first declension word, and so when it uses a first declension adjective, they're going to look the same. Bellum and amicus are second declension words, and so because these are second declension endings with our adjective, they end up looking the same. But it's going to be a little different when you look at a third declension word. So, for instance, when we look at soror, we can't just invent some form of magnus that matches the same ending, because we can't. These are the forms of the adjective we can use. We can't just make a different form. And so instead what we need to do is say, okay, what gender is soror? And that's a pretty easy one to tell because soror means sister. And so we say, okay, then if it's sister, then soror must be feminine, which if I want to describe the sister, I need the feminine adjective. So you would have soror magna. Same with frater. We can't say frater magner. We can't just take the ending from here because it's a third declension word. What we need to do is say, what gender is the word frater? And that's another one that's pretty easy because it means brother, and so it must be a masculine word. And thus we take our masculine form of the adjective from up here and say, oh, it's magnus, frater magnus. So notice that these endings don't match, okay? But what does match are the genders, and that's what's important. Then sometimes you'll hit a word like iter, which is tricky. It means journey. And so just from the word alone, you don't know what gender it is. And so you say, okay, if it's not a 2-1-2 and it's not one of my third declensions that has a pretty clear gender, how do I know what form of magnus to put with it? Well, that's when you then might either need to remember your vocab list or double check your vocab list. And when you look at this, you'll see the word is iter, itineris, neuter. So you say, oh, okay, iter is neuter. So if I want to talk about this big journey, I need the neuter form of magnus, which is then magnum. So the key thing to take away here is that adjectives are listed with 3 forms, and it's always going to go masculine, feminine, neuter. And when you're choosing which form of the adjective to use when describing a noun, you look at the gender of the noun, which might include double-checking a vocab list, and then you choose that same gender of the adjective. So vila is feminine, we use the feminine magna. Bellum is neuter, we use the neuter magnum. Amicus is masculine, we use the masculine magnus.